Okay, so most of us know the story of Mount Sinai, right? It's arguably one of the most famous mountains in all of human history. The place where Moses received the Ten Commandments. But the source material we're looking at today proposes an incredibly thought-provoking premise. What if the events at Mount Sinai provided humanity with far more than just a couple of stone tablets? What if God was actually handing down a completely world-changing blueprint?
To really grasp this, we have to set the scene, and honestly, it is a terrifying one. Just imagine standing at the foot of a mountain that is literally engulfed in fire. The ground beneath your feet is violently shaking with thunder. Lightning is flashing all across the sky. There's this thick, ominous cloud descending right onto the summit, and a trumpet starts blaring. But it's not being played by human hands, and it's just growing louder and louder until an entire nation is basically trembling in fear. And right in the center of this completely overwhelming encounter is Moses. So the big question we're exploring in our analysis today is, what exactly was God handing down to Moses in the middle of that storm? Was it actually ancient technology?
Now, before we get too far into this, we really need to clarify what our source means by the word technology. It's defined here as the practical application of knowledge to accomplish a specific purpose. So, no, God didn't hand Moses a laptop or microchips or some sort of mechanical machine. Instead, as the text outlines, he gave humanity divinely designed systems. These systems were practical applications of divine knowledge meant to accomplish a highly specific purpose, enabling humanity to experience God's presence and actually maintain a covenant relationship. When you view it from that perspective, what Moses received was absolutely a technology, just one unlike anything the world had ever seen before. Because people love a good mystery, there has been some pretty wild speculation over the centuries. You'll often hear theories wondering if Moses possessed some sort of advanced, lost science, or maybe hidden machinery. But our source text actually encourages us to pivot completely away from those mechanical theories. Instead, it points us toward a profound spiritual reality. The true miracle here wasn't human engineering, it was divine wisdom. God was building a framework for covenant, for justice, holiness, and redemption. He was essentially teaching a broken humanity how to live in a relationship with Him.
Let's dive into Section 1, a divine operating system.
If we look at this whole thing through the lens of technology, we really have to start with the number 400, because that is exactly how many years the Israelites had just spent as slaves in Egypt. Just imagine the sheer chaos of that situation. You have this massive, massive group of people stepping out into the wilderness, trying to somehow become a nation. After 400 years of brutal oppression, they literally didn't know how to govern themselves. Much like a brand new, unprogrammed computer, they desperately needed an operating system just to survive. They needed something to turn their chaos into order so they could function as a cohesive society.
Now, at first glance, ancient laws might not sound much like technology to us, but look at the framework they actually created. God gave Moses a complete, comprehensive system that covered justice, morality, worship, leadership, and community life. The text makes it a point to emphasize that these commandments were not just a list of random arbitrary rules. Not at all. They were carefully designed systems meant to protect the weak, restrain evil, and promote real justice. They revealed a holy character and set up legal principles that were so incredibly robust, they are literally still reflected in legal systems all around the globe today. That alone completely changed human history.
Which brings us to Section 2, the heavenly blueprint. So if the law was the software, you could say this next part, the tabernacle, was the hardware. God revealed a meticulous design for this beautifully engineered sanctuary where heaven and earth were meant to meet. If you walk through the layout, you really notice the careful progression. First, you have the outer court, which held the bronze altar and the laver. Then, as you move deeper, you enter the holy place, containing the golden lampstand, the table of showbread, and the altar of incense. And finally, you reach the most holy place. Every single measurement for this structure came directly from God. Every single material had deep, specific significance. Absolutely nothing was left to human imagination, because every step of this architecture was teaching a sinful humanity exactly how to approach a holy God. Seated at the very heart of this tabernacle, right in the most holy place, was one of the most remarkable objects ever described in history, the Ark of the Covenant. Built from acacia wood and completely overlaid in pure gold, it represented God's covenant with His people. Inside it held the stone tablets of the law, Aaron's rod that miraculously budded, and a golden jar of manna. And right above it sat the mercy seats, overshadowed by these golden cherubim. Now, some folks like to speculate that the ark was a literal energy source, but the text clarifies that its power was definitely not mechanical. Its significance came entirely from the presence of God resting above it. The real power was found in obedience to God. When the people actually followed his instructions, it led to literal miracles, like the parting of the Jordan River and the total collapse of the mighty walls of Jericho. This entire overarching system was driven by one repeated instruction: build everything according to the pattern shown on the mountain. Why such a huge emphasis on patterns? Well, because Moses wasn't just up there inventing a cool new style of architecture. He was reproducing a pre-existing heavenly reality. This earthly sanctuary was a visible, physical picture of invisible spiritual truths. God's designs are never just random. They are incredibly precise and deeply purposeful. Moving right along to Section 3, Systems of Sacrifice and Worship. Okay, so to actually run these systems, God established the priesthood. And we need to understand this wasn't just some honorary religious title. It was a highly specific, divinely established system for intercession and spiritual leadership. Aaron and his descendants were set apart for this, and their garments were just incredibly intricate. They were a specific breastplate, an ephod, a robe that actually had bells on the hem, and specially engraved stones. Listen, none of this was a fashion statement, and nothing was accidental. Every single tiny detail carried heavy symbolic weight, pointing directly toward holiness and their set-apart duty to serve before the Lord. Now, to our modern minds, the whole concept of animal sacrifices can definitely seem unsettling. But each sacrifice taught a really profound spiritual equation. Sin carries consequences, and holiness absolutely demands justice. Therefore, forgiveness requires atonement, and mercy requires a substitute. The source we're looking at heavily emphasizes that the blood of bulls and goats could never actually permanently remove sin. Instead, the heavy, visible cost of these sacrifices served as a constant, sobering reminder of the price of rebellion. It was acting as a shadow for a perfect redemption that was yet to come. And God didn't just structure their physical space and their rules, he actually structured their time. If you follow this timeline from the spring straight through to the late fall, from Passover all the way through the Feast of Tabernacles, you realize these weren't just holidays or nice days off from work. They were living, breathing reminders. Every single year, the entire nation actively rehearsed God's story of deliverance, his provision, and his faithfulness. Their very calendar became this incredibly effective tool for ongoing spiritual formation. And that brings us to Section 4, the ultimate spiritual upgrade. To bridge all these physical objects of the ancient world to their ultimate final purpose, the source text uses this absolutely powerful quote from the book of Hebrews. It says the tabernacle was, quote, a shadow of greater things in heaven. Think about what a shadow actually is, right? A shadow proves that a solid, real object exists somewhere, but the shadow itself isn't the final reality. The entire system given to Moses up on Mount Sinai was a shadow. It was constantly pointing forward to something, or rather, someone who was much, much greater. What's truly fascinating here is how perfectly the shadow matches the reality. According to the text, Jesus Christ is the ultimate fulfillment of every single piece of this ancient technology. Let's map it out together. It's pretty amazing. The manna they ate in the wilderness? Well, Jesus is the bread of life. The golden lampstand? He is the light of the world. Those endless animal sacrifices we talked about? He is the perfect final sacrifice. And the mercy seat on top of the ark? He is the exact place where God's justice and God's mercy finally meet. The text argues that without Christ, the tabernacle just remains an unfinished picture. But with him, acting as the true high priest, every single one of those ancient symbols finds its ultimate truest meaning. Which brings us to the core takeaway of our exploration today. What was the technology God gave Moses that changed history? It wasn't some forgotten science or hidden machinery meant to make physical life a little easier. It was a divine system of redemption. It was a comprehensive system that took slaves, turned them into a holy nation, and prepared the entire world for the coming of a Messiah. Thousands of years have passed since Mount Sinai. Whole empires have completely vanished. Our physical technologies continuously revolutionize our lives, and then they quickly become outdated. But the source leaves us with this really profound truth. While human inventions become obsolete, God's wisdom remains eternal. This blueprint was designed to bring humanity back to its creator, and it completely transformed the course of history.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to chew on. We've spent this time looking at some of the most intricate, purposeful, divine systems ever recorded. Systems that were designed not to build better machines, but to build better, restored humans. So, looking at your own life and the systems that you rely on every single day, the big question is, are you living by human invention or divine wisdom? Thanks so much for joining me today as we unpack this source text and keep exploring.